What's up, good people? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new to the channel, then please be sure to tap that like and subscribe button. So for today's race, I am doing the final stage, stage 4 of the Shimano Find Your Fast. It is the Jurassic coast route, and this time I decided to do a little something different. Instead of just going into range 2, I decided to do the advanced range, and let me tell you, it did not disappoint. This was a brutal race, to say the least. So coming out the gate, we start out the traditional high wattage in order to establish yourself in the front pack. There was about 80 people, I think 80-ish people in this race. And the interesting part about it is, in looking at the roster for this race, most of the riders were extremely tough, and had extremely high racing scores, with racing scores. And so I knew it was definitely going to be a challenge. The level of challenge it was is I did not anticipate. This was an extremely tough race. It wasn't the most brutal race that I've ever had. That title still resides with the stage 6 of the Tour de Zwift, but this was definitely up there in the brutality ranking. So periodically, I did push to the front, mainly during this race. I just got jostled all throughout this race. I was in first sometimes, and I was in 40th sometimes. So because this was a winding race, and because this was a winding route with multiple punches, I was kind of all over the place. The one thing I did struggle with, I seem to struggle with more this race than I have in the past, was just managing my power output. It was very inconsistent, and it was kind of all over the place. I don't know if that was driven by the multiple attacks and by the way the riders were attacking, which created inconsistencies in my power output, but I seem to not actually be able to develop a rhythm in this race. So my game plan this race was to, as much as possible, was to run down as many attacks as possible. I knew there were going to be multiple attacks, and I knew the attacks were going to be ferocious just based off the quality of riders on this route. And my goal going into every race is to hopefully, if possible, at least get the top 10. So I knew if I wanted to maintain top 10 in this race, the one thing I was going to have to do was to keep myself in the hunt. And by keeping myself in the hunt, that meant that I was going to have to run down more riders and more attacks on a consistent basis, because I figured there was going to be a mad sprint at the end. So now we're headed into our first and only major KOM on this route. As expected, it was another attack. I've been working a lot on my heel work, so I felt pretty comfortable with this route, with climbing this incline overall. The speed and the pace was kind of intense, but I felt like I had the conditioning that I needed to have in order to get up to the top of this KOM and still be in position to establish myself with the front wheel. So now that we're done climbing, my goal, especially in this race, because the pace has been so aggressive, was on every major incline to leverage the fact that I'm a heavier rider. So on the declines, I tend to be able to recover a little bit, just because the weight, my additional weight, seems to do me a solid on the decline. So as you can see here, I'm actually closing the gap. This is largely due to the fact that I'm not necessarily putting out much effort. It's just my weight is doing a lot of work. Even at one point, as you could tell, my pedaling has definitely slowed down, and this is definitely giving me a little bit of time to recover. The racers very quickly closed the gap. They're not going to let you get away. The super tuck is pretty much gone now with the last update, but being a heavier rider, I still do get somewhat of a benefit going downhill, which allows me to somewhat recover. I don't get as much recovery as I have in other races, just because the riders are so strong in this race. So I kind of got to keep pedaling, but I definitely get a little bit of recovery that I think helps me in the long run. So as you can see, the pack is still pretty much together. It stays like this basically the entire race. The entire race is a savage, and we're all jousting for position. Periodically, you'll see me go to the front as I am now. But again, that's short-lived, because as soon as you move to the front, there's somebody else coming to attack, and the entire group is following suit. And so it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get away from this group, which I didn't expect. The ferociousness at which these attacks were coming, and just the pace at which you were having to maintain in order to keep up with the front wheel was definitely unexpected. falling into the back of the pack is definitely a strategic blunder in this race. I've done it in the past, and a lot of times because I rely so heavily on my power output and because I'm confident in my power endurance, a lot of time I don't mind falling in the back of the pack and kind of just maintaining. And then as the race inches closer, kind of pulling myself slowly but surely up to the front so I can be part of the mad sprint at the end. That was my game plan during this race. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a strategic blunder just because the pace was so relentless that even if I fell back just to recover that energy that I gained in that little bit of recovery, I had to expend that plus some just to work my way up back to the front wheel because the group was just pushing so hard. Again, as you can see, we're moving downhill, which is a luxury for me. It gives me an opportunity to recover just a little bit. I can slow down my cadence and get my wind back because we still got a good amount of race left. I'm not necessarily concerned about huge breakaways. I definitely at this point I'm starting to feel it in my legs, and every downhill I'm using it as an opportunity to somewhat recover. So as you can see, the pack is still together. To be honest with you, this is how it is almost the entire way. You'll see at the finish line how close we all were in racing to the finish. And this is what I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be this intense, this deep in the race. But I should have known better with this being the advanced group and with everybody having such a high Zwift racing score that I should have expected us to be neck and neck all the way through the finish line. Here we go, still pushing over 450 watts. This race did definitely increase my FTP, and it was a pleasant opportunity to be able to grab and improve on my FTP. I expected it just because this group has punching so hard. As you can see now, we're still close to 500 watts. I mean, this is crazy that we're this deep in the race. It's a fairly punchy route, and we're still push it on a consistent basis, 450 plus watts. I think at this point, the group has somewhat relented on the pace. Everybody who's racing at this point came to the realization that you weren't going to break anybody. Everybody, it was just going to be a mad dash to the finish line. So, plan B, if you couldn't break the group up, plan B was to conserve as much energy as you can to make that big push at the finish line and hopefully pull out a dub. So it seems like the power ups were great this time around, but they seem to be few and far in between, which was interesting. And the other races, a lot of times they were giving them out like candy, but this time it was very selective on when you got them. And so, with you only getting very few, you had to be very strategic on how you were going to use it. This was actually great to me on how stingy the race organizers were with the power ups because in the Zwift games coming up in a few weeks, you only get one power up and you get it in the bullpen. So you have to be strategic on how you want to use it. So this is kind of just a precursor to that. Because I think we only got two, maybe three this race, you had to be definitely real strategic on how you wanted to use it. Because once it was gone, you were pretty much out of luck. One of the things I did see more of this race was steering. I take it a lot of cyclists has gotten the Google Play controllers. Slowly but surely keeping creeping to the final stretch. We're not there yet, but as you can tell, the runners are definitely starting to bunch up. The attacks are starting to be ran down a lot earlier because this time you just don't have as much distance to pull a rider in if the attack is executed properly. And so what you're seeing is that riders are starting to position themselves and stay with the front pack, because everybody knows in the next few minutes there is going to be a mad sprint to the finish line. For here on out, the entire race, for the rest of the race, I try to make sure that I maintain in the top 10. Again, earlier I mentioned that my goal was to be in the top 10 for every race. And in order for me to do that, I didn't want to leave anything to chance, especially with this group, that I was going to have to run a lot of people down at the end. I just don't think that was a realistic expectation with this group being so strong. So moving forward for the remainder of the race, I definitely said to myself that I was just going to keep myself in with the front wheel, so I'll be in perfect position to make a mad sprint at the finish line. I think I can honestly say that the decline from the hills actually helped me a lot. It gave me ample time to recover. And without that, I don't know where I would be at this point in the race, because I'm definitely tired. As you can see, I'm sweating, I'm breathing hard, and I'm definitely starting to feel it in my legs. So as you can see, everybody's starting to make that final push. This is the big final push, and we're trying to get ourselves in position to get that dub. So we're inching closer and closer. Everybody's trying to position themselves. You're starting to see the power-ups come, and now you're starting to see people start to press and starting to go for it. Me, I'm going for it. I actually hit 500 and 1500 watts this race, but to be honest with you, it's still not enough to pull in these racers. These racers were definitely strong. They were definitely, they left nothing to chance. And if you slipped up, which I did strategically at the end, you paid for it. As you can see in the results, then all the top 9 runners or the top 10 runners was a second or less from each other. So it was intense. It was a great race. I learned a lot. And moving forward, I'm definitely going to use a lot of the techniques that I picked up in this race in my future racing, especially the Zwift games next week. But until then, until I see you guys at the next race, peace, and I see you at the finish line.